Welcome back to Sunrise Daily, where we're turning our attention now to financial matters. The states only recently got approval to receive Lifeline from the federal government to bail out those states that have not paid their salaries. But that's part of what we're focused on now. We're joined now by Mr. Lenin Ogoji, who is a financial consultant. Thank you for coming on this morning.
Thank you. Good morning.
Well, taking a look at that decision, there were those who suggested that, wait a minute, we need to properly structure the basis upon which we're going to give them bailout or loan, whichever name we're going to call it. But it turns out they call it the Special Intervention Fund. And having done that, what do you think the implication of that decision will be to the states and to the country?
Thank you, Chamberlain. I think one needs to look at it because one thing about a lot of financial, if I may call them disasters, is that they seem to be cyclical. So, for instance, what has happened to us now has happened before, and I think one of the issues we have in governance is that we tend to forget. So, the implication of some of these
which part of it?
Exactly. I was just about to ask which part of
the disaster part. I think
where they couldn't pay salaries or the revenue dwindled.
Yeah, revenue dwindled. Because for instance, if you look at it from 2003, 2008 to 9, the same thing has happened. But we still seem to get into the same.
Is that a disaster? Because quite a number of people would not agree that that's not a disaster. The disaster will be that we did not prepare for what we knew was going to come.
Yeah, so what it means is that markets will go up and markets will come down. So we know that. So when you don't prepare, it now becomes a disaster because if you don't prepare, you'll have some problems. So for me, the implication of that is how do we look at, how is it going to be structured again? So you look at the states, why did they get themselves into this position? Considering the fact that they have been earning revenues, right? We came from a period of very high oil prices. Funds were moved to various federation accounts, and they were shared. What were they used for? So we're definitely going to still have to go back to that to find out really where we went wrong again. So I think that it's actually also a time for introspection. We need to now look at it again. What did we do wrong? How can we make it better? If we keep flogging the issue, I don't know.
What did you find? What do you think we did wrong?
Well, I think it's basic planning. It's basic planning. We have not planned for the rainy day. It's biblical. I mean, everybody knows it. People even give their children piggy banks to save. Everybody knows that you should save, when things are booming for you. And I think the government didn't do that. They most likely spent money far in excess of what their capacity is. You could have money in your account. It doesn't mean you can afford to buy whatever that money can spend. So I think some states went on some kind of social welfare type of thing. But the question is, I mean, utilization of that money in order to be able to generate more revenue is key. And I think many of them failed in that aspect.
Let's look at what occurred before. You're trying to link it with, the drop in oil prices then, and we saw the bailout that most countries, big superpowers, super economies went through, even the United States, and we saw how they were bailed out. But it would seem then as if Nigeria was immune to that particular issue then. So what was it that we got wrong that has affected us now? I'm trying for us to look at all of those gains that we got at that time when business was truly booming for us, and trying to, relate it to some of the states that haven't been able to pay their salaries. So if it's a matter of some, then what can you tell us that others did right that these some or few, didn't quite get?
Yeah, I think the simple answer is management. People talk a lot about, capacity, IGR. So many people say things. But I know, for instance, there's a state, I think it's Anambra, so that, for instance, has no debt, right? And they're not owing, even now, right? Meanwhile, you have some states who have such large debt, who receive probably some of the most money from the Federation account in terms of oil revenues, and they're still on that list. So it's clearly an aspect of management, and I think it calls to question who are the financial managers of these states, because if somebody gives you money to manage, you should be able to account. You should have planned. People knew these salaries. It's not as if they didn't know the amount. People budgeted for them. So what happened? We need to call to question that.
And you know the fear, sorry Jim, you know the fear there. Some have also argued that the composition of the National Economic Council, which, well, largely all governors are members.
Yes.
And if you have some few that haven't been able to manage it properly, manage the resources of their state properly,
yes,
as you have alluded from your expert opinion, don't you think we should start thinking of how to rejig the composition? Because if you're not an expert and you're not a good manager of resources in your own state or of your state, why would you be a member of the National Economic Council? What form of advice would you be giving?
Okay. Well, in terms of the National Economic Council, one needs to look at its composition statutorily. I think some of those things have constitutional bearings in the fact that I think some people constitutionally will be there. So the next question you ask is, okay, who are these people? So state governors and the likes will be there. A state governor does not necessarily have to be a financial expert, but I believe he would have one in the form of his commissioner for finance and things like that. So the next question is his financial commissioner competent? Okay, and if he is competent, the next question is, does he, the chief executive, take the advice of his financial manager? Or yeah. So you can see that it's not as easy as that. So if the guy doesn't take the advice of his financial manager, what next should happen? And I think that's what comes to the issue of values also. So for instance, a commissioner, you give advice that you truly think is genuine in the interest of the people that you're serving, right? And if your chief executive does not want to take your advice, maybe consistently over time, you can predict what will happen. The advice is to resign, because resigning also puts pressure on the chief executive. People start to ask questions why. And that's the only way change will eventually come, and it will flow down to the National Economic Council. Yeah.
It's interesting that you raised that point, considering the the bickering that went on shortly after the last administration left office,
yes,
and how some people started accusing the finance minister of spending some money without appropriation, and how she said, I beg your pardon.
Yes.
We had federal accounts allocation meeting and all the time.
Mm.
But does this raise questions as to the quality of the meeting that is being had, and whether or not state governments or governors actually follow on what exactly goes on in the meetings that their finance commissioners have at the federal level?
You are clearly spot on in the sense that one needs to really question whether the National Economic Council meeting is a meeting of politicians or a meeting designed to improve the economic architecture of the country. The problem...
That has a National Economic Council, but I was also referring to the Federal Accounts Allocation
Committee. The Federal Allocations Committee is more of the commissioners of finance who come, but the truth is that they have mandates, even when they are coming. I don't know whether they really have any, will I call it, input in terms of... I think they mostly look at themselves as there to collect money. I think that's the general...
But essentially, that's what we see at the end of each FAC meeting.
Exactly.
We get to hear, I think pressmen gather and that so-and-so amount was shared between this state and that state.
So if it's just a sharing exercise, one wonders really why somebody of such intellectual capacity has to go for it.
But I think we need to interrogate that a little more, because one wouldn't imagine that they just go there, share money, and the finance commissioners don't brief their governors. Because we had the governor of Edo State here, and we were talking about the same kind of scenario. He says, look, the commissioners of finance are not the ones that should be taking those key decisions as to whether or not to approve the certain kind of monies that should be spent. And then the response from the Ministry of Finance was, no, if those, your commissioners attend the meeting, we expect that they in turn brief you, so we expect that whatever they come there to do, they have your mandate. So it appears, look, this back and forth, something is lost in the middle, or somebody's not telling us the full story.
Full story. No, I think it's very clear that for a commissioner of finance to appear at a meeting, he's representing his chief executive.
He's supposed to represent his chief
It's as if
executive.
he's representing him because it's like a corporate entity, right? Okay, fine. The treasurer of the corporate entity goes for a meeting, and he makes statements and he makes commitments. Whether you like it or not, he's committed the organization.